The door. It just burst open. And in that moment, when they saw me, together with him, everything changed. My heart pounded in my chest, my face turned red, burning with shame, and I knew it, my life was over. But how did it get to this point? How did we go from simple prayer sessions to this? Let me take you back, all the way to the beginning. I'm 29, a nurse in a small town where everyone knows your name. It's the kind of place where secrets are hard to keep, and everyone's business becomes your business. But that's never bothered me. My work is my life, demanding, yes, but it's fulfilling. I'm used to caring for people, being there when they need it most. I take pride in it. So, when I was assigned to care for Pastor Samuel, I thought it would be just another routine case. After all, he was 72, and everyone in town knew him. He was the spiritual leader, the man everyone looked up to. His sermons were always full of wisdom, and his voice had this calming effect, like you could trust him with your deepest fears. He was respected. Untouchable, even. But when I walked into his home for the first time, it was different. He wasn't just another patient. There was something about him, something in his eyes. His kindness wasn't forced, it was genuine. It was almost like he saw right through me, straight to the heart of who I was. His warmth was magnetic. And there was an honesty in his voice, a way of speaking that made you feel like you were the only person in the room, even if you were just there to check his blood pressure. Before he fell sick, Pastor Samuel was more than just the man who stood at the pulpit every Sunday. He had a way of guiding people, offering comfort during their hardest times. I'd sit in the back of the church and listen to him talk, always feeling like he understood more than anyone else. Over time, I found myself seeking his advice, asking questions about faith, about life. Those evenings spent in the quiet of the church became a routine for me. We'd talk, we'd pray, we'd share stories about our lives. It was a bond one never thought would go beyond that. At least, not until I started caring for him at home. When I entered his house, something shifted. Those simple, fleeting moments of care turned into something more. Something I wasn't ready for. It started with the smallest things, things I could have easily ignored if I hadn't been paying attention. A touch that lingered just a second too long, a smile that was more than a simple gesture of kindness. At first, I brushed it off, told myself it was nothing, just two people, passing through their day, sharing a connection. Nothing more. Nothing less. After all, he was the pastor, the man everyone turned to for guidance, and I was just his nurse, there to do a job. So I convinced myself it was harmless. But the more I tried to convince myself, the harder it became to ignore. There was something in his eyes, something deeper than what we shared on the surface. Something that lingered after every glance, a quiet understanding, a pull I couldn't explain. And the worst part? I didn't want to explain it. I didn't want to acknowledge the way my heart seemed to race whenever he looked at me that way. Then, as the days passed, it became more difficult to pretend that nothing was happening. It wasn't just in the way he looked at me or the way our conversations drifted toward deeper things. It was in the silence between us, those moments where words weren't necessary. Late at night, after the rest of the world had gone to sleep, when the only sound in the house was the soft ticking of a clock, we would sit together in the dim light, talking for hours. Sometimes, we talked about nothing, just little details, the kinds of things people share when they feel comfortable in each other's presence. But more often than not, it was about things that weighed heavy on him. He'd tell me how lonely he felt, how his faith, which had once been a guiding light, now seemed like a heavy burden he couldn't carry alone. He spoke of the emptiness that followed him even in the midst of his ministry, even with so many people relying on him for strength. And I listened, really listened. In those moments, I felt like I could be there for him in ways I had never been for anyone else. I could see the weight of his words, the vulnerability beneath them. And for the first time, I realized that maybe I too had been carrying something. Something I hadn't been able to face until now. His pain, his need for connection, awoke something in me I hadn't even known was there. It wasn't just sympathy anymore. It was a pull, a desire to share in that loneliness with him, to make him feel like someone, for once, understood him. As the nights passed, it became harder to deny what was happening. I began noticing the little things, how the touch of his hand on mine felt like an electric current, how his presence, even in silence, seemed to fill the room in a way I couldn't explain. Those moments when I'd hand him his medicine, our fingers would brush, and for just a second, the world would stop. There was an intensity in the air that wasn't there before, a quiet tension that neither of us could ignore. And still, I told myself it was nothing, just a fleeting moment, just the closeness of someone in need and someone willing to help. But deep down, I knew it was more. It wasn't just about the caring anymore. It wasn't just about my role as a nurse, or his role as a pastor. It was something else. A bond forming in the silence, something too complicated to name, but too strong to deny. And one night, as I stood up to leave, my hand on the door, he stopped me. He reached out, just enough to catch my wrist, and with a tenderness I didn't expect, he pulled me back. His grip was firm but gentle, and for a moment, time seemed to slow down. "You've given me something I haven't felt in years, hope," he whispered, his voice soft but heavy with meaning. In that moment, my heart skipped a beat. I could have pulled away, told him it was just a slip of the tongue, that I couldn't stay. I could have walked out the door and pretended that nothing was happening. But I didn't. I stayed. I didn't pull my hand back. I didn't turn away. I stayed, and in that moment, I knew everything had just changed. That was the night everything changed. We tried to convince ourselves it wasn't wrong. He would look at me with those kind eyes and say, "God understands love in all its forms." I wanted so badly to believe him, to believe that what we shared wasn't something to be ashamed of. But deep down, I knew it was wrong. What we had, it wasn't pure. It was something secret, something forbidden. But we couldn't stop. We told ourselves it was harmless, that it was just two people in need of comfort. But the truth was, it was more. Much more. And no matter how hard we tried to ignore it, we couldn't escape what was happening between us. We were careful, so careful. We couldn't risk anyone seeing us together. We met in secret, in the quietest corners of his house, where no one would come looking. I'd arrive late at night, under the cover of darkness, when the world outside had settled into its peaceful sleep. He'd be waiting for me, his eyes always filled with that unspoken understanding. We'd sit close on the couch, the air thick with tension, and the conversations we had about life, faith, our deepest fears, became more than just words. Our touches lingered longer than they should. A hand on his shoulder, a soft, accidental brush of fingers. The way our eyes would meet and hold a moment too long. Every time, it felt like we were crossing a line. But we didn't stop. Then one night, it happened. We were sitting together in the dim light of his living room, me close to him, our bodies brushing as I leaned in to adjust the blanket over his legs. The moment was so charged, so heavy with everything unspoken between us. His hand found mine, his grip firm but gentle, and for the first time, there was no pretending. No pulling away. I looked into his eyes, and in that moment, everything else disappeared. It wasn't about faith or morality. It was just him, and it was just me. And we kissed. It was slow, hesitant at first, but it quickly turned into something more, a desperate need to feel connected, to feel wanted. The kiss deepened, and everything else faded away. I knew it was wrong, but I couldn't stop. And he didn't either. We didn't hear the door open. We didn't hear the footsteps. We didn't hear the soft creak of the floorboards until it was too late. I heard the gasp first. A sharp intake of breath that cut through the silence and froze me in place. I pulled back quickly, my heart racing in my chest, and looked toward the door. She was standing there, one of the women from the church. Someone who had known Pastor Samuel for years, someone who trusted him like family. The shock on her face was instant. The hurt was clear. She was staring at us, at me, at him. And in that moment, I knew. I knew everything we had worked to hide was out in the open. Pastor Samuel's face went pale. His eyes dropped to the floor in shame. He was speechless, his hands trembling as he tried to process what had just happened. But it wasn't his panic that hit me the hardest, it was the weight of my own. I could feel my heart pounding in my ears, my skin burning with the sting of shame. I had no words to offer, no explanation. All I could do was stand there, paralyzed, knowing that everything we had built was now destroyed. The trust he had built in the community, the trust they had in him as their pastor, it was all gone. And I was the one who had helped tear it apart. The news spread like wildfire. The whispers, the gasps of disbelief, the pointed stares, everyone had something to say. People called me every name in the book, homewrecker, sinner, disgrace. I could hear their voices everywhere. I went echoing through the town, each word cutting deeper than the last. It didn't matter where I went or what I did. The judgment followed me like a shadow, a constant reminder of my mistake. Pastor Samuel resigned from the church. He stepped down, his life unraveling in front of everyone who had once trusted him, respected him. I knew what that meant, the trust was gone. Everything he had built in that church, everything he had worked for, crumbled in a matter of moments. He lost everything because of what we had done. And I was left alone to face the storm that followed. I tried to keep going, tried to carry on with my life, but everything had changed. My job became unbearable. I couldn't step into that hospital without feeling the weight of their stares, their whispers. I couldn't even walk down the street without seeing the way people looked at me. And it wasn't just the strangers. It was the people I knew, people who once cared for me, who now avoided my eyes like I was something to be ashamed of. The burden of it all, the guilt, the shame, the loneliness, pressed down on me every day, making it harder to breathe. Every night, I found myself sitting in front of the mirror, staring at my reflection, trying to understand how it had all gone so wrong. Tears welled up in my eyes as I looked at myself, wondering who I had become. How had I let myself get so lost? I wanted to believe it was love, that what we had was real, that we had shared something pure. But deep down, I couldn't escape the doubt that lingered. Was it really love? Or was it just two lonely souls, clinging to each other in a moment of weakness, searching for something to fill the emptiness inside us? Even now, I don't know. All I know is that I was part of something that destroyed everything around me. And no matter how much I try to make sense of it, I'm left with the same question: was it worth it? I don't expect forgiveness. What we did was wrong, and I'll carry that guilt with me for the rest of my life. I can't change what happened, no matter how much I wish I could. Every day, I have to live with the consequences of my actions, the pain I caused others. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I hope that by sharing this story, it might serve as a reminder of the dangers of crossing lines that should never be crossed. Sometimes, the choices we make in moments of weakness can haunt us forever. I don't know if I'll ever find peace with what happened, but maybe by sharing this, someone out there will avoid the same mistakes. I don't expect anyone to understand what I've been through, but if you've ever faced something like this, something that made you question your morals, your choices, please share your thoughts in the comments below. I know I'm not the only one who's struggled with moments of weakness and regret. Maybe, together, we can learn from each other and figure out where to go from here. Thank you for listening to my story. It's not easy to share, but I believe it's important. If you found any value in hearing what happened, please like and subscribe. Join me next time for more stories of love, betrayal, and the unexpected twists life throws at us. Until then, take care of yourselves. And remember, sometimes the hardest lessons are the ones that teach us the most.